as everything in pdfToolbox, this is related to pre-press automation, even though the title is user interface improvements. And this session very much is what we, personally also I, expected in improvements in pdfToolbox. So in the end, we are not just developing pdfToolbox, we are also using it. And therefore, we are very much interested in improvements. So we get and receive requirements from you and support. And then we want to provide you with a sample profile. And then the easier that is for us to create a profile that you will then use in automation, the better. And then, yeah, it's user interface improvements, but again, everything that you would do in a user interface, you may export from there in order to use it for automation. So, first topic is get the release notes. And this is kind of funny because if you have installed pdfToolbox Desktop on your computer, you have the feature, but you didn't notice it. So you may have seen that blue bar here in your pdfToolbox 12 application with an indication that there is a new major version available that is pdfToolbox. You may have seen that on last Friday when we released it. But in that bar, you only saw the download button. And that was because we were still using pdfToolbox 12. With the next upgrade that we do for pdfToolbox 13, you will see two additional buttons. One is called Upgrade Info and the other is Release Notes. Upgrade Info just provides you with some information, more business information about how to upgrade your license if needed. And Release Info just brings you to the release note on our website. And I've made a screenshot here, so that brings you directly to this page. Not because here we see pdfToolbox 13.0, so the very release that we've just made, and only with the next release you can actually use that button. And in the release notes, as always, you will find everything that is new in the current release and the new release. And then I want to take that opportunity to mention another feature that is actually in the release notes. So it's much easier now to find the release notes that are related to the new version that we announced to you via the blue bar. In the release note, since recently, there are links to the documentation. So for instance, for this pdfToolbox 13.0 version, as we've just yesterday said, there are new actions, switchboard actions. In this case, in this example, that's just the unembed all fonts. And if there is documentation available related to that particular release note, you may click on it. So that is a link here, and that will bring you to the related article in the manual. So as I've yesterday said, pdfToolbox is a complex product. The documentation is important, and we try to make it as easy as possible for you to find articles that are related to new features. So that was my intro feature. Next feature is titled More Conveniently Work with Libraries. So as you know, in pdfToolbox, all profiles, fix-ups, checks, actions, and so forth are in libraries. And libraries are completely self-contained. So whatever you have in one library, almost nothing of it will be available in another library. That is a feature. It makes it easier to save environments and keep them distinct from each other. On the other hand, sometimes it's also a burden. So you may know, oh, okay, I created this or that fix-up, and I don't even know in which library I created it, but I know it's there. And then you want to, you are in the midst of creating a process plan, you want to access that, so you want to use that fix-up again. But then what you would have to do in pdfToolbox 12, you would have to go out of the process plan editor. search for the respective fix-up, copy it into your current library, and then you can only then you can use it in the process plan. In pdfToolbox 13, that becomes much easier. There is a green new icon here, and green in pdfToolbox often stands for libraries. A green icon with an arrow, and if you click on that, a new dialog opens that lets you search over libraries. And I want to show that to you. So we've just seen the process plan editor. Let's now try to do the same when creating a profile. So I have created a new profile here, and I go to custom fix-ups. And then maybe I want to use a new feature that we've done for downsampling. So I'm looking for something that has Langchos in its name, but I can't find it. So what I could do right now, so as I've said, there are green icons here, which are related to libraries. And I have two of them, one on the right-hand side. So I could now use it, and then I could try to import that fix-up I'm looking for into my library here. But usually you would want to use the one on the left-hand side, because probably you are interested in directly using it in the profile that you've just created. So let's use that button. And then we see the dialog that I've just that we just saw on the screen. And then I could type Langchos here. I have the capability to search over all libraries. So as we already know, there is nothing in the current library. But if we switch that checkbox on, we see there are actually two of those in other libraries. And then when I hit OK here, it will at the very same time copy that fix-up into the current library. And then, since I've used the one on the left-hand side, it is already in my profile. Yeah, so it's much easier now to work and to import stuff from other libraries. So I cancel it and discard my changes, which means the current library effectively doesn't have the fix-up. Another thing that is new here, I can type here Langchos, and as we know, it's not in the current library. I can search all libraries. Langchos. Yeah. I know the reason is I should go to switch to the fix-ups first, and then search all libraries, and then of course there are my fix-ups. And what I can also do right now, or in the past, I could now duplicate that thing, and then if I would want to modify it, and then it would be copied in the tests library that I have. It wouldn't copy it into the current library, which is PDF standards. But what I can do, what is new here, so here is duplicate, there is a copy into current library. So there is something now that easily allows me to copy the same thing into my current library, and now it is the very same fix-up is also available here in PDF standards. Okay? So, and this feature to copy objects, not just fix-ups, also actions or checks or whatever, into your current library is available wherever you may want to use it. So that means when you're editing profiles or process plans, as we see here in the screenshot, but it's also when you create filters for fix-ups, which effectively are checks, or if you use the property include other check, which refers to or uses another check in a check. And as we've seen, there also is this new flyout menu. Yeah, and here there's a screenshot for that as well, copy into current library. Yeah, the next one is easy and straightforward. So delete profiles, process plans, and fix-ups with all reference objects. So, and maybe I should step aside a little bit. Okay, anyway, there is delete process plan with referenced objects. And that basically does what it says. So assume you have imported a process plan. There seems to be a spelling error in the program. Assume you've imported a process plan to pdfToolbox, and you don't want to use it, and then you want to get immediately rid of it. You can do that in pdfToolbox 12 already, but then it would only remove the process plan. It wouldn't remove all related objects, maybe fix-ups, checks, whatever are in there. With pdfToolbox 13, it's possible to leave the library as you found it, which means it will then remove all checks and fix-ups that are used in the process plan, at least if they aren't used in any other process plan beforehand. Yeah, so that is possible. And the next one is yet another really tiny little feature, but since, pdfToolbox is a complex product, there are various controls in there, so I think it's good for the more experienced users to also mention such tiny little changes so that you're aware that they are there. You create a complex, maybe complex process plan. You're proud of what you have done and you want to save it. In pdfToolbox 12, you click on OK, which closes the editor. And then if you're not finished with what you have done, you can work on, but it's at least 2 clicks in order to get there. In pdfToolbox 13, there is a save button that allows you to save what you've just created. And then, of course, there is no rollback anymore. Next one. Integrate text editors with syntax highlighting. So in some places, pdfToolbox uses text files, configuration files, for instance, for page sizes, for run lists, for sheet configs in imposition, for font substitution, and so forth. Up until now, you would have to use an external editor, a text editor, in order to modify those files. In pdfToolbox 13, that isn't necessary anymore. So, and I want to show you this in an example. So assume we want to create a new page size. So we go to pdfToolbox again, and then we enter the switchboard. We go to Arrange, we go to Impose, and here I can select a page size out of a list of page sizes that are predefined in pdfToolbox. Now assume you want to use a page size that is not predefined. So what you can do is you go to Manage Sheet Sizes here in the flyout menu, bottom, and then a new the text file in which the page sizes are defined shows up here. And then you can, and I have prepared that, as you can see, you can enter a new one. So I have created one that is created by a user. So first there comes a user, then it has a name, and then it has 2 dimensions in millimeter, and guess why I was using 13 here. And then I could create another one just to show you that there is syntax highlighting. So it also already told me, okay, you may user here. If you start typing a capital U, it says, okay, but this is not complete here. So there is the wrong number of parameters. I need a couple of more parameters, so we should give it a name. So, and a tab, and then some sizes, and so, and it still says it's not right because it ought to have the right number of parameters here. So now it seems to work. I say OK. And of course, I now have my two new page sizes showing up in the list here. Yeah. And similarly, I could do so for a run list in the imposition scheme and a sheet configuration. So I have a new here. I can edit an existing one, and could also duplicate one, but David is getting nervous next to me, but you don't talk about that?
You can talk about it. It's no problem. I'm just looking at the comments, and people are saying this is absolutely great. So,
okay, cool. We've tested that before. David, you did a good job. No, thank you very much. Yeah, whatever. So as I've said, so I could now do similarly for, let's say, imposition scheme. I say new, but then I have a problem because I'm not that much used to creating things. So it's better I'm edit something, and here this is a run list, old style, not JavaScript, and you see syntax highlighting here. And then if you're able to do so, you can edit it. And of course, as you have seen, you could also duplicate it in order to create a variant out of that. That's that. There are more areas where you could use configuration files in pdfToolbox. That is for the one font substitution policies, something that is not that often used in prepress, more for PDFA conversion. But here you can specify lists of font names, and then, if specified, one such font, if present on in your font folder, could substitute another font in the very same row. Yeah. So, and that also, of course, allows you to have syntax highlighting and everything. And same here for dot gain curves, yeah, that are used in adjust dot gain, and also in a fixer where you create a wide form out of content on a PDF page. Next feature, zoom on zoom. I think it's pdfToolbox 13 is much easier and better to use when it comes to analyzing PDF files interactively. In pdfToolbox 12, you had the looper feature, and that allowed you to drag a rectangle on your PDF file in order to open it in the looper. The looper has a problem that, for instance, it doesn't has the indication of page objects that are found in the report, and therefore you were using the shift key and then drag the mouse for the looper. That will change, or has changed in Toolbox 13. When you now do so, it will zoom into the PDF page in place. So let's probably much better if I just show that. I'm opening a PDF file right now. I hit the shift key and just draw a rectangle here, and now it zooms into the page in here. If I use instead Alt Shift, it opens it in a looper feature, right? So what was Shift before now opens it in place, and Alt Shift opens it in the looper window. And the really nice thing, I think, is I think I have it in favorites. If I say list page objects and then hit on an object here, it jumps should jump to the spot on that place. You can use Alt 1 Shift like here. Let's use another one. Here we have that text, and then if I zoom into here, I still have the indication of the object that has been marked via the results dialog. Yeah, and then of course I could use the space to move the PDF file here. Yeah. And I will show you later on that this also works with the comparison feature. Yeah, and then there are more shortcuts here, usually quite helpful when you're using pdfToolbox, but you will also find them in this menu here. Next is related to processing steps. So as we've yesterday seen, there are various features in pdfToolbox 13 that are related to processing steps. This one is as well. And as you may remember, processing steps is metadata associated with layers, and then content on those layers usually is related to processing of the PDF file that is not the actual print process. And therefore, if you check for a minimum line width, for instance, you may want to exclude processing steps, objects that are on a processing steps layer. So if there is a thin hairline, let's say in the legend, it doesn't really matter because that is not going to be printed. But if it is a hairline in the packaging design, then you would want to find it. And already in pdfToolbox 12, you could create a check. You could just say, okay, is not on a processing steps layer, and then you could achieve what you want to do. So exclude any content that is on a processing steps layer. However, then you would have to manually set that up in your checks. So you would have to define those conditions yourself. That is more convenient in pdfToolbox 13. There is on the left-hand side in the check editor a new pop-up, and that lets you specify how the engine should deal with objects on the processing steps layer. So you can say check everything, processing steps and not processing steps, exclude all processing steps objects, or exclude all processing steps objects except white and varnish, because it may make sense to double check a line width on a white, on the white form or the varnish form as well. And then you could also say, okay, apply this check only to processing steps. Yeah. And that will also work for all the checks internally based on rendering. That wasn't possible before, so you couldn't do that in pdfToolbox 12, but you can in 13. So if you say, I want to determine the ink amount on a page, but I don't want to take processing steps information into account, you can use that pop-up and that will work accurately. And the same in the compare step in a process plan. So you may want to compare two PDF pages and two PDF files, but you may say, okay, but it doesn't really matter whether there is a difference on the processing steps layers, so I want to ignore them. Or you may say, I only want to compare objects that are on processing steps layers. So all of that is possible by means of this pop-up here. Next is page area definitions. Completely different, as you may guess. We were looking at all the various places in pdfToolbox where you can specify a custom area, a custom rectangle on a page, because you want to search for barcodes in that area, for instance. And then we saw, okay, sometimes, so you actually have conflicting requirements here. Sometimes you may, you may have a PDF file with varying page sizes, and then you may say, okay, I want to go, let's say, 10 centimeters inwards from my trim box, but since I don't know the size of the trim box, I can't specify an absolute value here. I just can specify distances to the trim box. That may be the case in the one place. And in another, you may say, okay, I know that this area that I'm interested in is 10 centimeters away from the lower left corner of the trim box. And then I also know the size of the area, but it doesn't matter how far that is away from the right edge of the trim box. And then in order to be able to cover both of these requirements, there now is a new pop-up in all of the occurrences or in all cases where you want to specify a custom area. And that has a title area specified by, and then you can go for either offsets to box edges, and then it tells you if you want to go inwards, you use minus, and if you want to go outwards, you use negative values, outwards positive values, and then you can, I'm using here the art box, you can specify a distance to the left, bottom right, and top edge of the respective box. Or you go for offset and width height, in which case you specify either lower left or left edge, upper right, and so forth. So you can specify the point, the location where you specify the offset from. So then the horizontal and vertical offset, and then you specify width and height. And again, that is available wherever needed. So for instance, in effective in coverage, in barcode, in find barcode, shape definition from custom box, in search text on place, or in the fix-ups to create shapes from a custom box where a barcode is placed, or geometry boxes are set, modified, or the feature that David yesterday mentioned, where links for text are created, but only in a custom area. So far, user interface improvements. Now we are comparing the comparison features in pdfToolbox 12 and 13. And there seems to be a question.
Yeah, before we go there, perhaps it's good to go over some questions and give you some requests. So the first one was about the libraries and searching in libraries.
Yeah.
The feature request was it would be nice if you search in all the libraries. Not all?
Okay.
I pressed the button, but not hard enough, apparently, so I'll start again.
So you always have to press hard for feature requests.
Yes. So the first one was about libraries. You can search across different libraries. The question was to make it possible to not only search in the libraries of the current version, but also previous versions. In other words, for pdfToolbox 13, I start with a clean library, but I still want to be able to search also in the library for pdfToolbox 12, for example.
Okay.
I didn't say it was easy. I said it was a feature.
Yeah, I mean, what you could do, of course, you could create such a library, or you import them.
Yeah. But I think the goal is to keep your existing library clean and still be able to, yeah, so that's that's the feature request. Next one is, I think, question/feature requests. So you can use processing steps for checks. Can you also use them in fix-ups, like when converting color or creating bleeds?
Yeah. To be honest, that is on the list. Yeah, it's on the list. I mean, it's obvious. Yeah.
Okay. And then let me see what else I have. Is it also possible to define a processing step to check for specific requirements via a variable or via a script?
I mean, yes, definitely. I don't fully understand what you are looking for, but of course you could definitely use arbitrary JavaScript controls, checks, and fix-ups. You could as well specify. Yeah, there are various ways. So basically everything that you can do with pdfToolbox interactively, you could also do using JavaScript or variables. And there are several levels of how far you would want to go with JavaScript here.
Yeah, I think so. Clarification. First of all, the JavaScript checks we haven't talked about yet, but then they will be introduced on Thursday.
True.
Obviously. But there is a clarification here. What was meant was on the left-hand side where you have this pull down, where you now have only white and varnish as an exception, but you can't make a custom combination there, right?
So you mean what you want to do is you create a profile and then you create a custom check.
Yeah, so you have a check, and on the left-hand
side,
side,
here you have the variable icon, and that allows you to do a variable.
Yeah, or now you say everything PS and non-PS, and then you can have the one that says no processing steps except for white and varnish.
Right.
I guess you want to allow making a custom combination of processing steps. Only check in the structural group, for example.
Exactly, and then you can specify which one to use via, let's say, so here if the that I'm not even sure. Yeah. So you need to use a number here, and 0 means it will check for everything, including PostScript. I'm old. I know that PS stands for PostScript. In this case, it stands for processing steps. So everything processing steps and no processing steps.
Yes, but so, that's not it.
Okay.
So what I want to have in this pull down, I want to have the ability to say I want to run this check, but I only want to run it on content in the structural processing step group, for example. And that I think is not possible at the moment.
Not possible.
Yeah, you would have to add conditions to the check in order to.
Right. Yeah. And that is, I mean, that would blow up this pop-up. So of course we thought about that, but we thought, okay, so that is so special. So probably you won't want to create a number of checks just for structural cutting. You may want to combine it with at least structural gluing or whatsoever. And if we would want to cover all the different combinations in just one pop-up, that pop-up would be really huge. So we decided to limit that to the most obvious cases.
Yeah. So that is a pity, is the feedback.
I mean, it's still, I mean, if you want to go that far with JavaScript, I mean, then I would really suggest to at least think about what David is going to show to you. So what you can do is you can combine, and I mean, that topic is complex enough that I may already reveal that. So you may combine whatever combinations of conditions you would set up here with an arbitrary area, with an arbitrary check, and then within that arbitrary area, so only in that limited area. You still have access to this pop-up. So, and then via JavaScript, you can use that JavaScript only to limit it to certain processing steps information. Yeah? So I mean, yeah, as I've said, and I really ask for your feature requests, but my understanding still is, I mean, either it's very complicated UI, or it is somehow limited here, and then there is a way to address this via JavaScript. Okay. Okay, in comparison to what I said before, we are quite similar with regards to where we stand right now. So a few words on comparison. First, there's really a new feature, a new threshold in pdfToolbox 13, which is called contiguous area. And I will show that to you in a minute. In pdfToolbox 12, we had two thresholds. The threshold for the per pixel threshold in %, so how much of a difference between pixel 1 in the one PDF, pixel 2 in the other, how much of a difference is allowed, and then the total area on that page, so how much area on a page may be different without creating a hit. In pdfToolbox 13, there is a third parameter, a third threshold, and that allows you contiguous pixels, contiguous area. And I have prepared one example here. I'm using this newsletter, and I've just created a variant of it that uses CMYK instead of RGB, and now I can compare the two documents with some settings here, maximum sensitivity, and of course I have some differences because RGB and CMYK are different, and then I could use delta E with a maximum of 4, and then total area doesn't really matter, and contiguous area doesn't matter either. So, and then I have many differences. And so just that you see something, if I now say I'm only interested in areas where there are more than 3 millimeters contiguously having differences, so I could enter 3 here. And then if I activate that, the areas, all these smaller areas go away, and I'm only left with the big areas where I'm having differences. And as I've said before, I could still use the zoom in feature here in order to zoom into the respective area to see what objects that really are. I mean, this is maybe not the very best example to demonstrate it, but it should come across what you can do here. Yeah. Moving on. Yeah, this is a special feature, a very special one. I believe we wouldn't have thought about it if it wouldn't be mentioned by one of you, at least. But I think it's quite understandable. Compare has somehow to do with statistics. So you have 3 different thresholds, and then on your PDF page, whether or not a threshold is hit or not really depends. So it might be just slightly above or slightly below. So then, and then in the one case it creates a hit, and the other not. And so if you do that quite often in an automated way, you may want to find out what actually has happened. So why hasn't it found any differences for these 2 PDF files, but it has found difference for the other. So you want to see what the actual measurement values were. So, and then of course you can open the PDF files manually in desktop in order to see that, but that is not what you want when it's about statistics. So you want to gather data, and pdfToolbox 13 allows you to do so. So what you need to do is in your preferences, and you can do that in pdfToolbox desktop, server, CLI. So in the preferences of the respective product, you have to have a folder logging, and in that folder you create a file that is called compare.log, and after that it will create a tab delimited file whenever a comparison is done and write the values, not just the ones that you see here. Of course it would also add the name of the respective file and a couple of other values. But you have all these values logged here, and then you can use that data, and I've just opened it in a spreadsheet here so that we can see something. You can use that data to do statistics and analytics. Yeah. And that is probably the last feature that I want to mention here. It's also about comparison. It's in the process plan. So the process plan, as you know, has a compare step, and it also has a new feature here, although it already had various parameters. There now is a page selector. So you can say, okay, for instance, when processing a PDF file, you add one page to it, a title page or whatsoever, with just production information, and then you want to compare it, but of course you want to ignore the page that you have added. Then you can specify in the one PDF, I only want to compare all pages starting with page 2, while in the other, I use all pages starting with page 1. Yeah? And this takes page selectors. I will tell you more about page selectors in the very last session of this event on Friday at 3 o'clock. And that's what I wanted to say to you for today, except thank you. But it must not be the last what I've said. If you have any remaining questions.
I think most of the questions have been answered. There are a few that I'm not going to talk about here in the group, but that we will take offline. There was a question, I think this was about the properties to specify a custom area. The remark there was that the only thing missing then is a filter to define a list of page numbers, I guess in combination with that, but you could do that with sequential page number.
Yeah, you definitely can. I mean, in a condition, you could use sequential page number in order to use that area only on specific pages, and there also is a new one that I will also mention on Friday that works similar to sequential page number, but uses what we call page selectors.
Yeah, the same question in combination with processing steps, but the answer is the same there.
Yeah, that should all work.
Yeah, and that is going to work with, regardless of whether the check has an apply to, it's a condition that you add in combination with the check that you would already have there, but not for fix-ups, of course.
No, for fix-ups, it's in the apply to filter.
It's in the apply to.
You have to remember this is working slightly different for fix-ups. In fix-ups, you create a filter, what we call a filter, and that uses checks. And then in the checks, you may use any combination of what we call conditions. So, and in a condition, you could say in one section, you specify an area. So that is one condition. And in the other condition, you say only page 2 to 10 or whatever. And then you have selected the area on pages 2 to 10. And then you can do some things in the fix-up with it. And for checks, you combine it with something else. So if you want to analyze that area only, you would say has text of size 12 in addition to that.